In the quiet, manicured suburban streets of Willow Creek, every lawn was a testament to conformity. The grass was always green, the hedges perfectly trimmed, and the flower beds meticulously aligned with the HOA's endless rulebook. To the untrained eye, it was paradise, a picture-perfect neighborhood where nothing ever went wrong. But beneath the pristine facades, tensions simmered like a hidden storm. And at the center of it all was Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed guardian of order. No leaf out of place, no mailbox slightly crooked, and certainly no property violation would escape her eagle eyes. Karen had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 15 years. In that time, she had cultivated a reputation that was almost legendary. Other neighbors whispered behind closed doors about the time she personally chased down a delivery driver for leaving a tire track on the grass, or when she forced a family to repaint their shutters 3 times because the color didn't meet community standards. To Karen, the HOA rules weren't mere guidelines. They were sacred laws, and she was their vigilant enforcer. But little did Karen know, her reign of suburban terror was about to meet its match. Across the street from Karen, a new homeowner had recently moved in, Jason Turner. He was a creative soul trapped in a world of restrictive bylaws. Unlike most of the residents in Willow Creek, Jason didn't see his yard as a space to blend in. He saw it as a canvas, a place where nature, art, and personal expression could collide. When he bought the house, neighbors were curious but cautious, unsure if his bold style would survive the HOA's iron grip. But Jason didn't care about fitting in. He wanted to transform his property into something spectacular, even if it meant bending or outright breaking. The rules, within weeks of moving in, Jason's yard had begun to transform. He replaced the bland, uniform grass with a mix of wildflowers that swayed in the breeze, creating a vibrant rainbow effect across the front lawn. He installed quirky garden sculptures, a life-sized wooden giraffe near the mailbox, a small stone labyrinth in the corner, and a whimsical birdhouse shaped like a pirate ship. A narrow, winding path of multicolored stones led to a hand-carved bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. To Jason, it was a work of art. To Karen, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. It didn't take long for the first HOA complaint to appear. Karen's sharp eyes caught the giraffe immediately. She marched across the street with her clipboard in hand, taking photos of every violation she could find. By her calculation, the lawn violated at least 7 HOA rules: unapproved landscaping, non-standard decorative objects, irregular pathways, and excessive color usage. That night, she submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, her report meticulous and unrelenting. Every detail, every flower, every stone was documented as a direct affront to community standards. The next morning, the first letter arrived in Jason's mailbox. Its neat, official formatting could not mask the tone of thinly veiled condemnation. He read it with a smirk, noting how many lines were dedicated to minor infractions. For the first time, he realized this neighborhood wasn't just about pretty lawns, it was about control. And if there was one thing Jason believed in, it was that creativity should never be stifled. But he also knew that taking on the HOA directly would be a slow and frustrating battle. He needed a strategy, a way to turn the tables without losing himself to bureaucratic red tape. Little did he know, his response would not only defy expectations but also set off a series of events that the entire neighborhood would talk about for years. Over the following weeks, the tension escalated. Karen didn't stop at the first complaint. She was relentless. She personally monitored Jason's property every morning, noting every change, photographing every new addition. She even took the extra step of speaking with other neighbors, subtly encouraging them to report any unusual landscaping activity. It was a campaign built on intimidation and constant oversight. Jason, however, remained calm. He understood the psychology at play. Karen thrived on being seen as the moral authority. If he could exploit that, he could gain the upper hand. Jason began observing Karen closely, learning her routines and habits. He noticed that she spent hours on her front porch, meticulously checking her neighbors' homes through binoculars, and that she carried her clipboard everywhere, even to the mailbox. He also discovered that Karen loved attention. She couldn't resist an audience for her complaints. Every act of vigilance was performative, a way to assert dominance over the street. This insight sparked an idea, an unconventional plan that would use Karen's own obsession against her. He started small. First, he introduced subtle, almost imperceptible quirks to his yard. A single flower planted just slightly outside the allowed color palette. A small rock arranged in a pattern that seemed innocuous but technically violated HOA spacing rules. Each alteration was carefully documented with photos from his own angle, knowing Karen would notice and report it. And she did. Within days, more letters arrived, this time with increasing frustration, as if the rules themselves were mocking her. Neighbors began whispering about the unusual escalation, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The war had begun, and Jason had set the battlefield. Yet, Jason's most daring move was still to come. He realized that to truly challenge Karen, he would need to combine creativity with strategy. His next landscaping project would be more audacious, more public, and designed to provoke a response that could not be ignored. Every element, from the choice of plants to the placement of decorations, would be intentional, calculated to make Karen overreach. He was no longer just defending his yard. He was preparing to execute a plan of subtle revenge, a spectacle that would shake Willow Creek to its core. And so, the stage was set. On one side, Karen, armed with rules, photographs, and relentless determination. On the other, Jason, equipped with creativity, patience, and a carefully crafted plan that would turn the neighborhood drama upside down. The seemingly serene streets of Willow Creek were about to witness a landscaping battle unlike any other, where every flower and stone carried a deeper meaning as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jason stood in his yard, surveying his work. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something extraordinary. A quiet smile crept across his face, for he knew that Karen was about to meet her match, and the retaliation he had in mind would leave her, and the entire HOA utterly stunned. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek, illuminating the perfectly trimmed hedges and the unusually colorful chaos of Jason Turner's yard. It was no longer just a property. It was a statement. The wildflowers, the whimsical sculptures, and the multicolored stone pathway seemed to radiate defiance. Karen Mitchell, perched on her front porch as usual, could feel it. Her eyes narrowed as she scrutinized every inch of Jason's property. Every step he had taken in the war was deliberate, calculated, and, most importantly, public. Her pulse quickened, not with excitement, but with the brewing fury of someone whose authority was being challenged. Why now? Neighbors had started to notice the tension between the two households. Subtle glances across lawns, whispered comments at the mailbox, and furtive photographs taken on smartphones became part of daily life. Some residents were amused, others exasperated. But everyone knew one thing. Karen had never faced opposition like this before. Every complaint she filed was met with Jason's calm, almost smug defiance. She reported minor violations, an unapproved stone statue here, a slightly crooked garden bench there, and each time Jason adjusted just enough to comply with the literal letter of the law, but never its spirit. It was maddening. Jason had begun documenting everything. Every letter, every photo, every petty complaint from Karen was carefully cataloged in a binder that grew thicker by the day. He wasn't just recording evidence. He was analyzing patterns, understanding her behavior, predicting her moves. Jason realized that the HOA's power depended on compliance and fear, and Karen's energy relied on the perception that she controlled the narrative. By destabilizing both, he could engineer a scenario where the tables would turn dramatically. The first major escalation came when Jason unveiled his centerpiece. A massive, hand-carved wooden sculpture shaped like a phoenix rising from the flames, positioned prominently in the front yard. It was spectacular, bold, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. But it was also technically non-compliant. The HOA guidelines strictly limited the height and type of garden decorations, and Jason's phoenix exceeded both. Within hours, Karen had a camera trained on the sculpture, her clipboard in hand, and the first complaint letter drafted. But this time, something was different. Instead of simply filing the complaint, Jason had anticipated her response. He had researched every clause of the HOA rules and discovered that while size and type were regulated, artistic expression was vaguely protected under a clause meant to prevent frivolous litigation. He printed out his evidence, photos of comparable sculptures in other neighborhoods, and even a local art ordinance that could be cited in his defense. When the HOA received Karen's complaint, it came back not with enforcement, but with a request for review. The momentum was shifting. Karen was flabbergasted. Every rule she believed she wielded as a weapon seemed to lose power when confronted by Jason's meticulous preparation. Her frustration manifested in increasingly desperate actions. She began leaving anonymous tips to other HOA board members, hoping to drum up additional scrutiny. She attempted to rally the neighbors, highlighting the dangerous and unaesthetic aspects of Jason's yard. Yet the neighbors, for the first time, weren't fully on her side. Some found Jason's creativity inspiring. Others were simply entertained by the unfolding spectacle. The power dynamic was tilting. Undeterred, Jason escalated again, this time with a psychological twist. He created small, playful installations that seemed innocuous, but were strategically placed to provoke Karen's obsessive tendencies. A stepping stone shaped like a tiny caution sign appeared just a few feet from her sidewalk. A small bird bath with a gnome reading a HOA handbook appeared where she could see it from her porch. Each addition was subtle, legal enough to be defensible, yet calculated to trigger her. Karen's reactions became increasingly public. Frantic note-taking, incessant photographing, and hurriedly written letters that grew longer and more convoluted. Jason's strategy extended beyond physical landscaping. He started to engage the community, hosting small garden tours under the guise of art appreciation, while subtly highlighting his legal compliance and Karen's obsessive behavior. Neighbors who once avoided conflict were now quietly cheering him on. Social media posts, carefully crafted to appear neutral, began circulating with photos of the Phoenix sculpture and the whimsical details of his yard. Comments ranged from admiration to amusement, but the overall sentiment was clear. Jason had become the beloved underdog of Willow Creek. Meanwhile, Karen's influence began to erode. She attempted a formal complaint escalation with the HOA board, citing repeated violations and the negative impact on property values. Yet the board, increasingly aware of the community's divided opinion and Jason's meticulous documentation, hesitated. Each new letter from Karen seemed less like authority and more like obsession. Even her attempts to recruit neighbors as allies backfired. Many quietly expressed admiration for Jason's audacity. The street that had once moved in synchronized conformity now hummed with a subtle undercurrent of rebellion. Jason's final move in this chapter of the feud was a masterstroke of subtle provocation. He planted a circular flower bed at the exact center of his yard, filled with a riot of colors and small sculptures, creating a visual focal point that was impossible to ignore. The centerpiece was a small sundial, perfectly legal but strategically positioned so that from Karen's porch, it appeared to point directly at her home. An ironic, almost poetic statement of the ongoing battle. It was audacious, visible, and symbolic. Karen could see it every morning, and she reacted exactly as Jason had predicted. With escalating fury and frantic note-taking, her obsession reaching a new peak, the neighborhood buzzed with tension and fascination. Passers-by paused to take photos, neighbors whispered over fences, and the HOA itself seemed paralyzed between enforcing the rules and acknowledging Jason's clever legal maneuvering. Every move Jason made was part of a long game, a chessboard on which Karen was unknowingly the most predictable piece. He was no longer just defending his property. He was winning the psychological war that as the sun set over Willow Creek, the street seemed to hold its breath. Jason stood at the edge of his yard, surveying his creations, every element designed to provoke yet remain untouchable. He could see Karen across the street, furiously scribbling notes on her clipboard, a mix of outrage and obsession etched into her face. The air between them was thick with tension, a silent acknowledgement that this was no longer a simple dispute over landscaping. In that moment, it became clear. This feud had escalated beyond the mundane rules of an HOA. What had begun as a creative expression of one homeowner's vision had evolved into a psychological spectacle, a public battle of wits, strategy, and cunning. Karen, with all her authority and meticulousness, had been drawn into Jason's carefully orchestrated web, and the next phase of the plan promised to be even more spectacular. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave the entire neighborhood talking. The phoenix had risen, the gnomes had taken their positions, and the community had chosen sides. The tension was palpable. Jason's strategy was unfolding exactly as intended. And Karen, for the first time in years, was no longer in control. The tension in Willow Creek had reached a boiling point. Neighbors whispered from behind curtains and fences. Their curiosity mingled with a quiet anticipation. It wasn't just a landscaping dispute anymore. It was a full-blown suburban spectacle, a story that people would retell for years. Jason Turner's yard had become a symbol of creativity and rebellion, while Karen Mitchell's obsession had turned her into a cautionary tale about what happens when control meets clever opposition. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, and everyone could feel that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Jason had spent weeks preparing his final move. Every detail was meticulously planned, every placement intentional. His yard now resembled an interactive art installation, blending wildflowers, sculptures, pathways, and symbolic arrangements that would provoke, amuse, and, most importantly, make a statement. At the center of it all was the phoenix sculpture, its wings seemingly reaching toward the heavens, surrounded by smaller installations that subtly mirrored Karen's own obsessive tendencies. There were miniature birdhouses perched like surveillance cameras, stepping stones shaped like clipboards, and a whimsical sundial aligned to cast shadows directly across Karen's driveway. Each element was harmless on its own, but together, they told a story. The watchful eyes of a neighbor could be turned back on her, a mirror reflecting every obsession and every rule she had ever enforced. Karen noticed the changes immediately. She arrived on her porch earlier than usual, binoculars in hand, only to find new, carefully positioned details that seemed almost taunting. Her pulse quickened as she scribbled notes, took photographs, and drafted complaints. But Jason had anticipated every move. He had already submitted detailed documentation to the HOA, proving that every addition was within legal limits. For every infraction she thought she had found, there was a counterpoint meticulously recorded. The rules that had once empowered Karen now constrained her, forcing her to either escalate beyond reason or acknowledge that she was being outmaneuvered. Over the next few days, the battle intensified in a subtle, almost theatrical way. Karen attempted to rally neighbors, hoping to muster support for another complaint. She distributed flyers, emailed the HOA, and even tried to schedule a neighborhood meeting to discuss Jason's yard. Yet her efforts backfired spectacularly. Neighbors who had once been intimidated by her authority began openly questioning her motivations. Some even offered to help Jason with his landscaping, framing it as art appreciation, while undermining Karen's credibility. Social media posts began circulating, highlighting Jason's clever use of creativity and legality against an overzealous HOA enforcer. The narrative was shifting, and Karen was losing the PR battle in real time. Jason, however, remained calm, observing from his porch with the precision of a chess master. Every reaction, every frustrated gesture from Karen, every whispered comment from neighbors was anticipated. He had studied human behavior, understood the psychology of obsession, and designed his yard to be the perfect countermeasure. It wasn't just about the HOA rules anymore, it was about flipping the power dynamic entirely. And the final act of his plan was ready. On a bright Saturday morning, Jason unveiled his ultimate installation. A large, whimsical topiary shaped like a caricature of Karen herself, perched prominently in his front yard. It was an exaggerated representation, binoculars in hand, clipboard clutched tightly, standing amid perfectly manicured hedges, but unmistakably her. The topiary faced the street, visible from every neighbor's porch, every window, and, most importantly, Karen's own front yard. It was audacious, humorous, and symbolic, a mirror held up to her own obsessive tendencies. Karen's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She stormed across the street, furious, waving her clipboard and muttering to herself. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some stifling laughter, others capturing video on their phones. The HOA board received another complaint, this one more furious and elaborate than any before. But the documentation Jason had prepared was flawless. Every aspect of the topiary, its height, placement, materials, complied with HOA guidelines. The board could only acknowledge the legality of his work while politely requesting that Karen temper her personal grievances. For the first time, Karen had no leverage. The rules that had always empowered her now constrained her, turning her into an unwitting spectacle. Word of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Photos and videos went viral in neighborhood groups, and even local news outlets picked up the story. Creative homeowner outwits overzealous HOA enforcer. Jason's approach was celebrated as ingenious, a blend of artistry, strategy, and humor. Karen, once feared and respected, became the object of ridicule, her obsessive tendencies amplified by her own reactions to Jason's careful provocations. The neighborhood had shifted. Creativity was now respected, absurdity was tolerated, and authority without reason was questioned. In the aftermath, Willow Creek was never the same. Jason's yard remained a bold display of individuality, celebrated by neighbors and admired by passers-by. Karen retreated, her influence diminished, forced to reckon with the fact that her rigid enforcement of HOA rules had met its match. She continued to monitor the neighborhood, but now with a quieter presence, aware that she had been outmaneuvered by someone who had not only defended their property but turned the entire drama into a masterclass of strategy and subtle revenge. Jason, for his part, continued to nurture his creative vision. He added small seasonal displays, updated sculptures, and maintained the phoenix as a symbol of resilience and transformation. But the greatest achievement was not the physical yard. It was the lesson he had imparted to the entire community. Control could be challenged, rules could be interpreted creatively, and even the most obsessive enforcer could be outsmarted with patience, strategy, and a touch of artistry.